And he said to me, he said, Cole, there's a lot of, there's a lot of useless people that end up in sports, unfortunately, because they get there as sports fans and they don't have the work ethic or the drive or the know-how to do well in their careers. But he said, you're not one of those.
Kind of a nice compliment at the same time, but you had to maybe make sure it wasn't about you. So that's good stuff. Exactly. Welcome to episode 125 of The Route, presented by White Whale Marketing. The Route is a glorified sports business coffee chat that has a new guest every episode as they share their experiences and route in sports. As always, I'm Christopher Nascimento, and let's get started. Before we begin, just a couple things to cover. If you're watching us on YouTube here, you can see at the top hand corner it says The Route. Underneath that, it says at The Route Sports. That is our username on all social media handles. So all the good stuff, Instagram, Twitter, Facebook. Feel like I'm missing something, TikTok. But more importantly, the reason I bring that up is we're also on LinkedIn at The Route Sports. So it's kind of a great way to kind of connect with us, the guests, maybe even people who are engaging with the podcast. That's a great way to either, start your networking, expand it, or even just kind of maintain it. So check it out there at The Route Sports. On that note as well, you can see just beneath that username on the video podcast, there's all these different logos. Just take the time to maybe subscribe, follow, rate 5 stars to the podcast on whatever platform you're on. Just allows the podcast to grow a little more easily. And we're on all major platforms, right? So if you're listening via audio, we're on also Apple, Spotify, Google, Amazon, and I believe 6 others. So you can find us fairly easily via audio. But then for video, as I mentioned earlier, we're on YouTube underneath the White Whale Marketing YouTube channel. So that's White Whale MKTG. And we have the Route playlist there and all of the episodes that have had video, which has been about 60, 70, something like that now. You can find them there. So check us out there. Clips are also available from all the podcasts on social media and YouTube. So take the time to see us there.
Damn it, I lost another bet. I always do this. Why can't I win at least one?
Need an edge in sports betting? BetStamp allows you to compare the best available odds among sports books. To get an edge in sports betting, download the BetStamp app and use the code WHALE to get access to all the affiliates and pricing. The only way to get an edge in online sports betting is by having accounts with multiple sports books.
Yes.
BetStamp.
Now, with all that good stuff covered, we can get into the meat and potatoes of the episode, which is our guests. So I'd now like to welcome someone who has been able to climb the corporate ladder with Canadian junior hockey, with 16 years at the CHL, and now being the vice president of business operations at the OHL, Cole Butterworth. Welcome to The Route. How's it going?
Good, Chris. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm pretty excited to get into this route. Obviously, a lot of the listeners for the podcast are primarily Canadian. So considering the nature of your position and what you've been able to do in your career, I'm sure that's going to be something a lot of sports grads, sports management grads are going to be looking to kind of hear about. I guess to kind of just kick things off, it's called The Route. So let's go through yours. Where did you maybe go to school? How did things start? And how did you get into the position you're in today?
Yeah, well, I'm a Laurentian University grad, sports administration program, SPAD. Found out about that program through a friend of mine. His older sister had a friend who took it, while we were in high school. Loved sports, played hockey and baseball, golf, high school sports, and, really didn't want to know what I wanted to do when I grew up and found out about that program. I think everybody kind of said, you don't want to go to school in Sudbury, though. You're not going to like Sudbury. People don't like Sudbury. And I heard that and I said, okay, well, this program I read about and it just sounded too perfect to me. So I said, okay, I'm not going to go to Sudbury until I moved in. And I waited until my first day of university and, drove up with my mom and my brothers and packed up the dog in the family minivan. And we went up and 4 years later, loved the experience, loved Laurentian, loved Sudbury, continue to love Sudbury this day and definitely correct all those people that gave it a hard time to me early on. Because it's an amazing place. And just had a fantastic 4 years there. I think while I was there, gained a real appreciation for the Sudbury Wolves and the OHL and, the broader CHL, just with what they did within that community and the fan base they had going to games. So really enjoyed kind of watching that. In my, I guess it was third year, we had to do a special project, and I was like a lot of Canadian guys wanted to work in hockey, sports, but it was hockey specifically. So I did a placement with the Sudbury Wolves for game days for the third year of university. Was at every game. There was 6 of us. A bunch of others have gone on to successful careers in hockey or in business in general. But did that every game with the Sudbury Wolves, and that then led me to report to Curtis Hall, I should say, who's still with the Sudbury Wolves today. Curtis, definitely somebody that helped mentor me early on. And Curtis put me in touch with Daryl Boynton, who was with the OHL, with the CHL at the time. Again, another Laurentian grad, and introduced me to Daryl. Ended up doing my 4th year internship with the CHL in the OHL head office, and the rest, as they say, is history. They got rid of me for a month after I graduated, but since then I've been back and been there ever since. That was in 2005. So yeah, a real good path to get here, and enjoyed it along the way.
Yeah, no, that's fantastic, and yeah, pretty interesting to hear. And I guess just kind of maybe going back to the beginning before we kind of get into your career now with the CHL. You were talking about Laurentian and the SPAD program. You mind maybe diving into that a bit more, because I know I've received messages from the White Whale, or not the White Whale, the Route Sports account, where listeners are like, hey, like, what program would you recommend? Obviously, I'm not an academic advisor, so I don't have the best knowledge about the different programs, but what types of things kind of stood out to you? Obviously, it's a sport administration program, but was there anything else that kind of stood out versus, I know there's a program at Brock. I think a lot of universities now have different sports-related programs. Was there anything specific that stood out?
Yeah, I think at the time for me, I was either going to do this or I was going to do business. So it was kind of, I could get a Bachelor of Commerce specialized in sports administration. So, I mean, that was really what set it apart. I think you read about the internships that they offered in 4th year and some of the places that people had been over the years. So it was just kind of reading through that. I didn't know anyone specifically. I never met that individual I referenced before that had taken the program, but just when I read about it, it just seemed more and more like this was what I wanted to do. I also like the idea of, I think, staying in a smaller area. I grew up in the Kawartha Lakes around Lindsay, Ontario, where I am today. And, I didn't want to go to a bigger city. So that was very appealing, but it was really just the Bachelor of Commerce piece that really was the second piece that gravitated me towards it after the initial reaction that I read about it. And I mean, the program just celebrated its 50th anniversary, and I'm sure a lot of people that you've interviewed have been SPAD grads. So yeah, a lot of history there now.
Yeah, I've actually had quite a few SPAD grads on here, but then just kind of building on what you're just saying there, it's kind of impressive that the age, I think you're 17, 18 when you start deciding which program you go into, to kind of have the foresight of, hey, like, this program has these internship opportunities. I know I was just in the mindset, I was like, I'll just do accounting. Accounting's pretty safe. Everyone needs an accountant, because I didn't really know what I was going to do yet. So just, even before getting to university, kind of knowing that, is that something where you never really wavered, right? When you were deciding, I know you said business a bit, but was it always, hey, I want to try sports? Or I know people have come on the podcast, and a lot of times it seems like law school or something else has kind of stood in their mind, or was it very much business or sports business?
Yeah, it was very much business or sports business. I mean, I think for me, people caution me, you're not going to get a job in sports. It's, it's one thing to take a sports program, but it's hard to get a job in sports. So I think that was also when you looked at the programs, okay, what's going to set me up for success? And then it was also my mindset of, okay, 4th year, want to get the best internship that I can get. So what do you need to do leading into that? 3rd year, again, is the best example. I asked the older students, and they said, get this particular position with the Sudbury Wolves. And here's some people that have done that and have gone on to, Hockey Canada, the NHL, the CHL. And I kind of use that, that knowledge to make sure that when I was leaving school, that I was best positioned to have not an internship first, but then a career coming out of that. So, I mean, that was kind of always my goal from the beginning. Could have ended up in straight business and definitely been happy. I mean, I think it's sports and business, especially when you're in the business role with sports. I mean, you're walking a very thin line in what you're doing. But it's, definitely looking back, made the right choice, and, I'm very glad that I did.
Yeah, no, that's pretty interesting. Just how you're saying how, people maybe have said how you're never going to get a job in sports. 'Cause I remember when I kind of grew up in Quebec and I went through the CHL system. I remember I was talking to a professor because that's the time where you're starting to figure out, hey, I'm going to apply to university. Where should I go into? I know I wanted to do something relating to business. And I shared with him because every project I did was relating to sports. I was like, hey, like, I think kind of be cool to work in sports because I found out about a sports program at Bishop's University. And then he kind of told me, he's like, hey, you know what? You're really good at business. I think you have the mindset for it. But he's like, leave sports for the weekends. I think that's what he said specifically. And once he said that, I was like, okay, this is someone who's a professor, all that good stuff. And that's what I ended up doing. That's why I went into accounting. But then once you realize, oh no, there's so many different things you can actually be a business person in sports. I think that's very apparent because otherwise, when you kind of initially think of it out of high school, you just think about like GMs, coaches, and there's only, let's say, 32 in the NHL, and you don't think about all the different sports. So it's kind of interesting that maybe seems to be a theme with people in sports where people initially say, hey, that's not going to happen to you. And I guess then building on that as well, you're just talking about your time at the SPAD program, and then you're talking to older students, and you're saying, hey, get this specific internship with the Wolves. Why was that specific role going to allow everyone to then move forward to have a successful career?
I think networking was a big part of it. Again, I referenced Curtis Hall. Curtis was a key guy that helped me get into the CHL and OHL for my internship after that. He was also able to kind of, say, hey, I can talk to some of my past students that have done this, that have gone on to successful careers in hockey. So it was really that kind of here's one of those 6, again, roles with the Wolves. And if you looked at the last 5 years, he could reference 3 or 4 individuals with where they were and say to me, would you like to work here? Would you like to work here? And, my answer was, yeah, absolutely. So it was kind of knowing that he could put me in touch with them after I could relate, have Curtis's his reference, but also be able to say, yeah, I did what you did. And here's what I thought about it, and be able to have that, conversation that they could relate to. So that to me was why that was important.
Yeah, no, that makes a ton of sense. And I guess obviously when you take on that role, if you, let's say, just drop it and you don't do well, obviously they're not going to refer to you. So let's say someone's listening, because a lot of the listeners are kind of in the 20s age range. What are the kind of things you're able to do to be successful, where then people were going to refer you and were going to introduce you to all these other people that went on to have success?
Yeah, I think it was always just like everything, just try and go a step beyond what's asked. Make sure that you're always putting your best foot forward, making sure that you're always positive, and make sure that you're helping and encouraging others, and that people want to be around you. So pretty confident that when that season ended, that was the case. Again, I live in Lindsay, Ontario. I did at the time. It's about 4 hours to Sudbury, and I was driving back up there over the Christmas holidays because we had a game. The game experience couldn't falter without this bad student. So, the 6 of us went up, and obviously it was Christmas break, so we had some fun while we were up there too. But it was important to us to make sure that the Wolves knew that we were going to support them, and that they continued to have success, and that they wouldn't fall off while we were gone. And obviously that's not to say that we played a major role, because we were game day students, but it was something that somebody else would have had to pick up. And the holidays are obviously an important time for everybody, so we wanted to continue to do our part. So I think just knowing that how much they supported that, and I think that went a long way for all 6 of us as we look to advance our careers, knowing the dedication that we could show to them.
Yeah, that's just crazy. Like, some of the stories I've been hearing on this podcast of what would be called, like, the travel people had to do from home to work, right? I know we had someone on a previous episode where they're saying they had 2 jobs. One was in Kingston, one was in Toronto. So you finish work and then take the train. Yeah. And then even just this on a 4-hour drive, that's just crazy. But I guess that's part of it, right? When you're passionate about it. Mm-hmm. And I guess then building on from that, right? You're talking about the program. Obviously, then you had success with it, and you're able to kind of move on and get your next internship with the CHL. So how did that look like? Obviously, you had success. Was it strictly just, as you're saying there, you were good, you got a reference and moved on? Was there an application process? How did it move forward from there?
So it was late in the my placement with the Wolves, and Daryl Boynton, who I referenced before. Daryl came up to the Wolves game that night, and he brought Commissioner Branch with him. Had been talking to Daryl, and Daryl again had done the same position with the Wolves under Curtis. So Daryl said, "Hey, we're coming up. I want to introduce you to Mr. Branch, see what he thinks, and we'll go from there." So. You can imagine, again, 4 hours back to the city. Game ended about 10 o'clock. They've got a long drive back. Had a 30-second interaction with them. Again, big smile on my face, tried to say all the right things in that short window. And Daryl called me a week later and said, yeah, Dave said he thinks he liked what he saw. He's willing to give it a shot. So that would have been, a few months later, packed up and went back home and started my internship with them. And then it was really reporting to Daryl. I mean, we were a very small office at the time. CHL and OHL were under one roof. A lot of responsibilities, but that's also why it was a great experience, because it wasn't a case where, I was joining a staff of 100 people. It was probably at the time a staff of less than 8 or 9. So, even though you're an intern, you were tasked with some responsibilities and you had to deliver. So it was a really, really fun experience. Developing content for the website, for e-newsletters at the time, supporting our staff on the national events, which again was 2 people. So it was you're getting right into the thick of things. Trying to think what else I did. Working on some different publications, and then just typical, things that kind of get left to the intern to pull off for the full-time staff. So, but yeah, really, really enjoyed that experience.
Yeah, no, and I think just you touching on that, I think that's something super important, right? Where maybe looking back to how I viewed things, right? Coming out of high school, coming out of CHL, I was like, hey, if I'm going to work in sports, you're going to go to the Major 4, right? And that's so limited, where there's around 120, and then it's a huge team there as well. But then when you think about all the different leagues, all the different sports, and the different levels they have, they're almost more like a startup environment, right? Where you're talking about, you're part of this CHL office, but it's still 9 people. And I'm sure you got to work with everyone. You had your hand in everything. But then that allowed you to kind of get experience in all these different areas that if you went to, let's say, the Maple Leafs or let's say the Red Sox, you'd probably be very much focused on just website content. Yeah. Right. So I'm sure that helped you grow a lot. And then I guess from that internship, what types of things stood out? Because I know the last person I just interviewed here, they're talking about they viewed internships as a test drive, right? They're trying all these different things, seeing what worked, what didn't, what kind of areas they could specialize in. Was there anything that stood out to you within that time that was like, hey, this is where I'm going to be good at?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely enjoyed the national events. I mean, again, I'm only a few years out of high school at that point, so to be able to travel across the country was a huge thing for me. Obviously, that's something I hadn't been able to really do much of yet. Traveled to a few spots over the years as I grew up, but that was definitely a case where it was, becoming a little more commonplace. It's like, okay, next month we're in Montreal, now we're in Vancouver, and that was definitely fun, being a young guy in his 20s. So really enjoyed that. Really enjoyed the national events. Also learned what I didn't want to do. Knew I didn't want to do sales. Did a little bit of sales as an intern. Had some success with it, but at the same time knew that it wasn't for me long term. So again, tried to put my best foot forward and try and get some good results, which I did. But knew that that's not where I wanted to be long term. So it was all in all, just a really good experience.
Yeah. So I guess from there, I know you're saying sales is definitely not where you're going to end up from there. Where did you go on from that, right? So let's say you had your internship. I know you said you had that 1 month block where they didn't bring you back. But then once you finally got back to the CHL, what kind of role were you in, and were you able to develop?
Yeah, when I came back, I initially came back on a part-time basis to support them with the Memorial Cup in 2005. And the 2005 Memorial Cup was a pretty special one because it was an NHL lockout year. The London Knights at the time were in Budweiser Garden. It was only a few years old, so it wasn't. I shouldn't say was and continues to be one of the top venues in the Canadian Hockey League. The London Knights were an unbelievable team, and Sidney Crosby was also playing for Rimouski Oceanic. So you kind of had this perfect storm of just a Memorial Cup coming together and all these things enhancing it for the hockey world to be at. And I showed up, hadn't been to the arena in London prior to that, and showed up and was just instantly like, wow, like 9,000 fans here, crowds are just wild. Sidney Crosby, who I've been hearing about for a few years and saw through my internship experience to a certain extent. But just seeing that firsthand, I remember, Gary Bettman was there, Wayne Gretzky, and I just went, wow, this is really impressive. This is definitely something that I want to continue to be a part of. So at the same time, Darryl Boynton was leaving. He had just decided that he was going to leave the CHL and move over to Hockey Canada. So he said, hey, this is a natural for you. You're done school. People know you can do the job. Like you should approach Dave and say say that you'd love to be able to stick around and take this on. So, we had that conversation, and it just really worked out from there. So I think that was really where I could prove myself, just the microscope that we were under with that event and all the key people there. That's the CHL's biggest generator from a sponsorship standpoint, obviously from an attendance standpoint. So broadcast, all those things. So it was good to be in front of kind of all those key stakeholders and, meet a lot of people and, try and, again, always keep saying, put my best foot forward and make sure that when people left, they went, yeah, I met Cole, and yeah, he's great. That'll be good to work with him next year. So that was good. And then it was, the reality of, okay, now on the business team per se there, it was okay. There's 3 of us, and now I'm one of the full-time people. So that was really eye-opening, I think, as we got into it. And it's like, okay, Cole, now you're not just doing intern work, you're doing this. And just the expectation that kind of grew from there. But my first full year in the league, we had, at the time we had our international series, 6 games across the country. We had the top prospects game that year, which I believe was played in Ottawa, Ontario at the, what is now, I'm drawing a blank, I'm sorry. We're the 67s play the Senators play right now. And then the Memorial Cup was in Moncton. So that was, again, another interesting year. Got to be in an NHL building for the top prospects game. Travel out to Quebec, or the Maritimes, I should say, the Quebec League for the Memorial Cup, and across the country again for Canada, Russia. So that was really, I think, an eye opener for me into how much it actually took to be one of the key people on the events. Just how on top of things you had to be, how organized you had to be, how you had to be, even if you were organized and ready, just how important communication was, because you can be ready for anything, but if people don't know that and you haven't shared with them what they need to do their side of the job, things can fall apart. So that's really where I got started with the CHL when I became full time, was kind of expanding that role with events, and then eventually branched out from there.
Yeah, no, there's even just from that, I have 4 different questions I kind of want to get into. So one of the things you're just touching on, right? You're working for the Memorial Cup. I'm sure that's kind of, obviously I know you worked for the Wolves and then you were an intern, but then being there, obviously you had all these top NHL prospects that were going to be part of the Memorial Cup. You have Crosby there as well. Was that kind of your first real experience, let's say, working in sports with the curtain was pulled, right? Where you had, these maybe interactions with top talent. Obviously, you're younger age, where you're maybe a little closer to the athletes, where I know when I worked one of my first jobs, I was kind of the same age as them, where at the end of practice, I'd be trying to kick, free kicks as well. So was there any kind of stories that kind of came up like that at that time period?
I wouldn't say stories like that. I think, like you said, I think it really opened my eyes, though, just with how big junior hockey is in this country and how many people follow it. To see all those brands that a few months ago, I would have been 22 at the time, I guess. Students back home watching Sportsnet, watching different hockey games, and kind of seeing all those personalities right in front of you was a bit of an eye opener. And wow, this is pretty cool. It was definitely I'm trying to think what other events. I think as an intern, the events I would have done was we did a Canada Russia event in Montreal at the Bell Center at the time, and then in Quebec City at the old Colisée. So those were pretty impressive. So that was kind of the third event. Obviously, we go into some smaller events, smaller venues, smaller towns, which is cool in its own way. But yeah, being in London for that first one was really this is pretty interesting. I want to be a part of something like this.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I guess just touching on that as well, one of the things you were, explaining when you had that experience at the Memorial Cup, it was kind of, one of the marquee events. Obviously, all the big sponsors, all the key stakeholders are there. And then obviously from there, you're able to then kind of parlay that into a full-time role. So what were the types of things or maybe advice you would have for, let's say, someone listening who's kind of in that similar position where, hey, how do I take advantage of this, huge event, having all these key stakeholders available there? What types of things were you doing to kind of stand out, or was it more so just, hey, let me do my job and just be known of, hey, you can rely on Cole?
Yeah, I mean, I think that was really what I was trying to do. It's like, okay, what is the end goal here, and then try and be as self-sufficient as you can be to get that job done. Because I mean, it's if you have 40 questions, you're going to impact what others are able to do. And again, in such a small staff, it's time is important. So obviously at certain points you need to ask questions. You can't assume everything. You can't assume, or you can't only make so many assumptions. But I think for me, that was definitely something like trying, okay, where do we need to get to, and how do I help get us there? I think definitely just trying to meet people, not be in their face, but just, hey, very nice to meet you. If I can do anything, here's my number, shoot me a text, let me know. And then, some people reach out, some people don't, but trying not to be that person that's being pushy. Just kind of show your value and hope that people will see that and appreciate it, and that you'll be included in future projects.
Yeah, and then I guess just before we kind of get out of the area of your first role and the internship time period, one of the things I think is kind of important to touch on is kind of maybe that transition from intern to a full-time role. Obviously, you're touching on, hey, there's much more responsibility. They're relying on Cole for these things, and how you need to be on top of all the different elements. Now, what was kind of was there like a specific wake-up call that came, or like, whoa, like this kind of hit you faster, or was it more so a gradual process and you kind of just took it in stride?
Yeah, I think there was probably a few hiccups that I had early on for sure. And then I think it's the reality of, okay, you're full time now. You need to be a big boy and you need to figure these things out. So I think accountability definitely changes when you go from intern to full time, which only makes sense. So I think then it's just, how do you prioritize? How do you learn from others? The goods and the bads. Definitely tried to do that when I first started. And then I think too, it's just, okay, looking at what are we as a CHL trying to accomplish? And then, what can I do to accomplish those goals, and trying to prioritize things in the right area, the right time. Cause I think we all deal with it. You'll have people showing up in your inbox, your texts, your phone calls, and they're pushing for something that's really important. And sometimes it's difficult to say, yes, whoever, I know this is important for you, but unfortunately I can't get to this yet. And you don't want to be that person, but the reality is sometimes you have to be. So I think it's just knowing, and I think that's just takes experience and maturity. Definitely still try and respond to people as quick as you can. But I think the reality is when you're dealing with 100 people, everybody's got different priorities, and it's just trying to make sure that, you prioritize what you need to prioritize, and, just understand what other people are working on, and what they truly need, and what they can wait a little bit on.
Yeah, no, that makes a ton of sense. And then I guess, what were the things you were able to do? Because obviously I touched on this in your introduction. You're within the CHL for 16 years before you went to the OHL. What ways were you able to kind of develop? Because oftentimes whether it's even, let's say, guests that come on here, maybe they hit a wall where there's a manager that's been there for an extended period of time, and to get promoted they would have to go elsewhere. Or like, what types of things were you able to do to kind of continuously climb within the same organization? Because I'm sure that's not always the easiest thing to do.
Yeah, it was. Only climbed so much, truthfully, because in a lot of ways, as I said, there was 3 of us, and it was actually only after my first year my boss left, and now I was only 24, I guess, and I'm going, okay, well, I say my boss, we both reported to Commissioner Branch, but yeah, when my my immediate superior left at the time, it was, okay, who's going to replace him? Who's my new boss going to be? How are we going to work together? And it was a few months went by, over the summer months, and the fall was coming, and events are coming at us, started the season's coming at us, and talked to Commissioner Branch, and he said, well, like, are you open to giving this a try? And my immediate reaction was, who, me? Like, I'm 24. That was a little bit terrifying. And he said, hey, we're going to support you. We have other senior people within the organization, and more so in finance and different areas there, and they'll support you. There's people here that can answer questions and help guide you. But are you prepared to take on this director of marketing and events role? Thought about it and said, okay, let's give it a shot. And that's really, where I was able to get to. So, I got into that role. I was relatively young at 24, but we were such a small staff. So, it was really, then it was just try and keep up and deliver high quality events with a small staff. And I think where I really grew within that organization was as we developed as a CHL and identified new priorities. It was, okay, we need to hire we need to hire someone to do this specific role. We need to hire an individual for this role. So by the time I left, we were up to, I'm trying to think off the top of my head, I probably had 12 or 13 direct or indirect reports. So it wasn't so much that, I climbed the ladder so much that we kind of built steps underneath me, if that makes sense, which was needed just to improve, what we were able to do at our national events, with our sponsorships, with our broadcast, and work with on our corporate sponsorships. So it was a little bit of more of that. Essentially, I started reporting directly to Commissioner Branch when I was again, I think I was 24. So that in itself didn't change. Dave was my direct boss for a long time after that for initial season, but it was kind of the CHL expanded and the responsibilities they expanded underneath me with specific people. So that was really fun because we were able to do a lot more things and kind of grow our brand and our business structure. But it also kind of gave me the ability to kind of show my leadership skills and hire a staff and kind of work with them.
Yeah. Like, to be honest, what that almost sounds like to me is, I remember like the first networking event I ever went to, I decided I had to go to Toronto because if I was going to make the jump into sports, I had to go make the big one because otherwise I'd get nervous or get scared, and I've never done anything before. So I was like, I'm going to go to Toronto to make sure I make a splash. And one of the advice I was getting from people there was always apply for roles or always kind of take on roles that you kind of need to grow within, right? So was that one of those things where, because you were 24, you're taking on this large role, and obviously then you had some people to help you around you. Was that something that allowed you to kind of develop at like a faster rate because you're, kind of going trial by fire, right? You'd learn things, you'd figure things out like much quicker at a rate that you probably wouldn't have if you were just kind of maybe going on your own at a 24-year-old pace.
Yeah, I think definitely. It was one of those ones, I definitely had fear of failing. So wanted to make sure that nothing took a step backward. I had good support outside of the CHL office as well. Yvonne Bergman with the WHL, Ryan Hideki with our sales agency, CCMC. And I think the Memorial Cup that year was in Vancouver. So, Yvonne with her experience, she really, she was a mentor. Yvonne retired from the WHL, I guess a year and a half ago, maybe. So Yvonne was really a mentor to me, and that first season was crucial, because she pushed me, she challenged me. She in her role couldn't allow the Memorial Cup out west to fail, so she really kept me hungry and kept me focused, and drove me to be better. So I think once we got through that first year, and that Memorial Cup was a success. Through some other great people as well, the Horst Organizing Committee, the Vancouver Giants, and a lot of others. But definitely, I think I got through that first year, and it was like a weight had been lifted off my shoulders, and it was like, okay, you can do this. It's not going to get easier. It gets different. Some things get easier, but there's always new challenges and something like that. But definitely getting through that first season, I think, helped me grow and helped me show that I belong and that I could have success.
Yeah, for sure. And I guess before we kind of move on to your time at the OHL, one of those things you were touching on was kind of, fear of failing. And I think a lot of times too, sometimes when people take on those bigger roles, they almost have, imposter syndrome, or like, hey, like I shouldn't be here, especially at that age. Was that something you're kind of dealing with? And I know you're saying you had all these great people around you, and they're almost not going to let you fail, right? They're like, come on, Cole, you're coming along for this ride, right? But was there any other things that you kind of, I don't know, maybe figured out? Because maybe that's something I feel like a lot of people probably can relate to, right? When they kind of take on this role that, they think, hey, like this is something big. Should I even be the person for this job?
Yeah, I mean, definitely had that when I first started. You're asking me to go back a ways now too. You're really testing my memory here, but all this first couple of years with the CHL and internship. But yeah, no, I remember, Dave said, hey, we're going to promote you to director of events. And I went, I'm 24. Like, what are people going to think? There's going to be people within the league that think they can do a better job. And definitely I felt that I was maybe in over my head and that people would be doubting me. But yeah, like I said, was able to overcome that. And I think the more you do it and the more you realize it's like, okay, hey, always try and be the hardest working person in the room, always prepared for meetings and events and make sure that you're ready. But I think definitely I started to have more confidence in who I was and what I was able to do as that went on. But definitely early, it was overwhelming. And, again, I was 24. I was working with people that were, 30s, 40s, 50s and beyond. So definitely felt like they were looking at me and going, the intern's in charge of this event. But like I said, was able to have success and grow from there and, develop some respect from a lot of key people early on, which I think that definitely helped, my reputation within the league, that people said, no, Cole's good. He's working hard. He's doing a good job. So I think people gave me the benefit of the doubt. And, with that, I was able to earn their trust and, their respect.
Yeah, no, actually, this isn't a sports business podcast. It's a brain health, just testing everyone's memory. That's what it's all
Yeah,
about.
yeah,
But maybe kind of putting that aside now, I'll leave the memory games in the past now. If you don't mind, maybe we can kind of touch on your experience at the CHL right before you transitioned to the OHL, and then maybe in that answer as well, you can kind of share how you went from the CHL to OHL. Obviously, I'm sure you had a bunch of people you knew, and when the drive came up, you were probably like, "Hey, Cole's the perfect person." But I think it'd still be interesting to hear how you went from the CHL to the OHL.
yeah. It was so it happened during COVID, which was obviously a difficult part for a lot of or time for a lot of people. And definitely in the junior hockey world, there was a lot of uncertainty. Um, the CHL, Dan McKenzie started as the first full-time CHL president in September of 2019. Again, that was another time that it was like, okay, can I do this? I've had one boss really here since I started. Dan came over from NBA Canada. Um, definitely there was a feeling out process with Dan. But I think over time, definitely, again, was able to prove myself to Dan. We'd only really been working together 6 months when COVID hit. And then we were in a bit of a hold pattern and trying to find a way to do different things for our sponsors, for our fans, trying to find a way to hold safe events in that time was a challenge. So worked with Dan for, I guess, almost 2 years. And then kind of over that time, an individual left, Joe Birch, I should say, left the OHL. He went to the Kitchener Rangers to become their new COO. And so there's a bit of void in the OHL office in that VP of business ops role. So it was interesting to me. Didn't want to leave the CHL by any means. Great, continue to have a great relationship with their staff, great relationship with Dan. We really, we enjoyed working together and continue to enjoy working together, different capacity now that I'm at the OHL, but definitely keep in touch and have a good relationship. So it really came to that opportunity with the OHL. And for me, honestly, it was all about two things. One, my wife and I found out we were pregnant. We were expecting a little girl who was born last summer. So there was a bit of, okay, do I want to be traveling across the country as much as I have and nights and hotels and whatnot, or do I want to be based solely in Ontario for the most part, where I can, even if I'm in Ottawa and I drive, I can get home, and when she wakes up in the morning, I'm home. So that was a huge part of it. And then it was just, as much as I said before, how much I love the Memorial Cup and how much I do still, and how much it means to me, and how much I appreciate that experience. It was also, such, especially now, just the expectations and the undertaking had become so much that despite the staff had grown so much, just my personality it would consume me for April and May, and it would be, get home, have supper, and then back on my computer and trying to prepare and make sure that everything was all that it could be. So I just knew that I needed to make a change, that I wanted to get away from the events and kind of get in more of the constant day to day and general business operations. So it was something I approached, Mr. Branch about coming over to the OHL, and again, kind of just the timing worked out. There was a fit there, and it's worked out really well.
Yeah, well, first off, congratulations on your daughter. And I guess before we get into, because I'd love to hear more about the transition during COVID, because obviously that was a difficult time, and just kind of maybe the ideas that kind of come from it is kind of very exciting. But just what you're saying there about events and like the lifestyle change. I remember last week I was chatting with someone who's in events, and they're kind of just laying out their schedule for me.
Yeah.
And I thought I was busy where, I had to go somewhere for a client, I traveled, and then I had a surgery, and I was like, oh, I can't wait to be home. And they're like, oh, I haven't been home in X amount of weeks. I'm going here. And I was like, oh, that's wild. So I can only imagine. And I guess now going back to like that time during COVID, obviously that was something where the whole sports world kind of was at a pause. So what type, you kind of touched on it, what type of things were you able to do, kind of engage the CHL fan base, types of things to ensure that, let's say, I'm sure even partnerships, you wanted to make sure that they're still there. Yeah. What types of things were going on and you were able to kind of to work on during that time?
Yeah, it was funny. I shouldn't say funny, but I know the first few months it was such a, okay, how do we clean this up from a sponsor standpoint? Where are we at? And I mean, I was working longer days those first few months than when the season was still going, because there was so much in turmoil and, and just confusion and trying to get people aligned. And I mean, the nice thing for us was our corporate sponsors with the CHL, but across the entire Canadian Hockey League, all of the leagues, they were so good about it, so patient. There really was that, hey, we're all in this together, and don't worry, we'll figure this out. So that was, I think, the nice thing. It wasn't. I remember calling one sponsor and telling them, hey, the season's canceled, and they just kind of, yeah, that makes sense, which was insane to think about even a few weeks before. So the cleanup of that and trying to get everything aligned took weeks and weeks and weeks, right into the fall. So that was definitely a part of the ongoing piece. And then it was also, how do you stay relevant? Because you didn't know when things were going to change. So it was different social programs. It was historical games, re-showing those. It was digital Q&As with people, trying to anything you could do from a social media and a digital footprint, primarily trying to stay relevant and speak to your fans. But it was hard. It was definitely very hard, because we're also in a point where our players are at home. They're dealing with their own challenges at that time. So you can only lean on our players for so long. And I mean, financially, our teams were in a really tough spot. So there was also the, what's going to happen here? How long can we sustain this? And I know the CFL was in very much the same boat. And you would read stories about where is the CFL going, and the CHL. People would ask, like, do you think you're going to lose any of your teams? And it was terrifing, because obviously, I'd been there so long. You talk about the relationships that you developed with different staff members across the country, and and the fan base is there. Because I mean, you can only assume it's going to be the smaller teams, and you think if some of those smaller communities lost their team, would they ever go back? So luckily, we as a CHL across the entire country, we were able to work through that, and proudly, I think we can all say we're still 60 teams strong today. But it was a real struggle. So it was a team effort to get through that, and people were laid off, and it was a tough time at the club level, definitely, for sure. But we got through it. Again, corporate sponsors were fantastic. Definitely at the club level, corporate sponsors continued to support them as being key things in their communities. So it was an interesting time. It was a tough time. But it was also too, we had to plan to be ready. Okay, if we get the green light to go in a month from now, how are we going to be ready? So it was kind of always that. It was a lot of hurry up and go, or hurry up and wait, I should say. I kept using the analogy. I feel like I catch the ball and I'm on the 5-yard line, but I never hit that goal line. I go back and I start again. So it was a lot of that, unfortunately.
Yeah, I know that makes a ton of sense. Where I was working in soccer at the time, and I think we found out the season was going to kick off again, and we had a week. So it's kind of just crazy. And I remember that week, the amount of just long days. But obviously, it's almost even just crazy to think that happened as a whole, right? Where the whole world stopped. And then just kind of the things you're touching on there. I've had conversations with people recently, and they're just talking about all these different gaming activations. I think the podcast, either right before yours or two before yours, is someone who founded a company that has a lot of activations for pro sports teams that involve games. Is that something that you think, because of, obviously I know technology is always changing, there's always trying to find a new way to engage fans, but do you find maybe that's something that kind of arose because of COVID, where we had to get a little more creative, and obviously you couldn't have a game go on? So the way you kind of interacted with the fan was much more, creative, and finding ways to kind of engage them without the sport on the ice.
Yeah, I mean, you look at some of the things now we take commonplace. This podcast maybe being one of them. At the time, and we did very little video chat. We've done some, but I mean, when you talk about interviewing our players, I mean, that was, if any, it was extremely minimal. Whereas now it's commonplace and it's done constantly. We did an esports competition around the Memorial Cup with our partner Kia, which was good. A lot of different second screen initiatives with our CHL app. Again, promoting historical games, key games, just anything we could do to engage with our fan base. But I mean, it was tough. It was a case where without the hockey actually being played live, right, the fan base starts to wane, and there's not as much interest. But we definitely got creative. I think we definitely learned from some things, and some good things have come out of COVID, like I said, and I know a lot of bad things have, so I don't say that to be disrespectful to anyone. But selfishly, I think we as a league got better in a lot of ways. I think a lot more efficient, and we did learn from that. So it's definitely glad, and I say this knocking on wood, that that's in the rearview mirror. But I think in some ways we definitely came into that stronger.
Yeah, no, totally. And kind of this podcast is a perfect example where I started just before COVID, and I remember when I was kind of doing test episodes, I was going to like a convention center and interviewing people with these lav mics. And obviously because of COVID, everyone started using Zoom now. Everyone kind of got much more comfortable with having a conversation over a webcam where, now I get to chat with you, even though you're 5-6 hours down the highway. Right. So that was, let's say, a positive from it all. And I guess before we kind of wrap it up and kind of get into the two final questions I'd like to ask every guest, you might maybe diving into your current role a bit, because I think that's something that's very much of interest, where when people are in school and they're saying, hey, like, what do I want to become? They want to become a VP or, a president of a league and different types of high level positions like that. So what does it entail? What does it look like? And maybe you can kind of share a bit more about it.
Yeah, I mean, it's really, in this role, it's a lot of people ask how it's different than the CHL. And I mean, the reality is I'm on a lot of the same calls. I just kind of have a different seat at the table compared to the CHL. So that's kind of the nice thing. I said when I moved over here, I was kind of moving out of the house, but I wasn't leaving the family. So a lot of regular interaction with those same people, like I said, with Dan McKenzie, Carla Gransma, Kyle Ferguson, Ryan, a lot of others. So that's been good. I think where it's different is it's a lot more day to day with the 20 teams of the OHL. So it's, how do we help them from a corporate sponsorship standpoint, bring in kind of those regional and national dollars through our sales agency that Matt Gergley and myself in our office support. How do we drive OHL revenues through our IP rights, through our different events that we do in the OHL, playoff based draft, development events that we do, all different things like that. So it's a lot more, I think looking at the entire season and having a plan on day to day, week to week, how you're going to get from A to B. It's not so much like it was at the CHL with the highs and lows of the different events. So I've definitely enjoyed that pace. So it's really how do we continue to grow the OHL, as a brand. And that's really done in our communities with our teams. As I said, I mean, I grew up in the Lindsay area. I think I went to one Oshawa Generals game, one Peterborough Pete's game growing up, just far enough away that it wasn't something I got too often. But when I got to Sudbury, just had an appreciation for how many fans were there and how passionate they were. And, that appreciation's only grown over time as I've been at the CHL, now at the OHL. So it's getting into those communities. It's helping the teams raise their brands and grow their brands, and just working with a lot of good people that have, in some cases are right out of school like I was, wanted to make a difference with those teams. And in some cases it's individuals that have been there since I started, which is a lot of fun, because I've kind of grown up with them in some ways. And I think it's just trying to have that collective, end goal together and trying to work there. How do we support each other, get there? How do we help grow the league? Because as we grow the league, it lets us do more for our players. It lets us do more in our communities. We're so proud of what we do with our players, with scholarships and donations within our communities. So it's really just trying to drive that.
Yeah, no, I'm sure it's like a huge undertaking, especially now working with 20 teams rather than the 60, but even just more so being involved in the day-to-day of it all. But yeah, no, like I grew up in Gatineau, so I went to go see, the Olympics growing up, and I just remember the memories I have is just crazy, right? Where everyone's shaking the glass. I thought the building was going to come down. It's just kind of incredible experience where it's really different than pro sports, because it feels like it's much more accessible, if that makes sense, right? It feels like, hey, like these are like teenagers, right? They're kids that are in high school. Different. Yeah, it's a very cool, like organization, even type of sports to kind of be within. And then lastly, kind of to wrap up the podcast, obviously went through your route here. I'm going to test your memory, I guess, to an extent. I like to say I'm going to go to 103 on a rocking chair, looking back at all the good times. So let's say you're 103, you're on a rocking chair yourself. Is there a story to date that kind of stands out to you that you'll probably remember at 103, be like, wow, like that was pretty cool. I got to do that for a job.
Oh God, something specific. I'm going to think of something tonight. I wouldn't say anything specific, like one that would exceed all others. I mean, for me, it's, it sounds cliche, but it's definitely the people, so many good relationships and friendships that I've developed over the years, working in the Canadian Hockey League, so many good experiences, traveling the country, different people that you meet. Just, I think as a collective, it'd be hard to really identify, one particular experience. I think it honestly is just the collective. It's going into Rimouski, Quebec for the Memorial Cup in 2009. It's Halifax in 2019. It's I think out west, and we were poised to have an event in Kelowna, the Memorial Cup in Kelowna, right before COVID shut us down. Again, kind of Vancouver was the the first Memorial Cup that I led, and then the second one was in Ontario in Kitchener. So it's kind of everything in between those, just the travel, the late nights on those events. As much as I said, that's what part of the reason I decided to leave. Just so many good times. Driving Cape Breton in late November, and just kind of everything in between. It's just so many good experiences. So glad that this is where I ended up, and just really proud of what I've accomplished.
Yeah, no, I think that's a perfect answer, just because a lot of times, especially with the long hours, the travel, different things like that, if you don't have the good people around you, it makes it much worse, right? Where I remember I was out somewhere for a client in December, and one of the guys we're up until 3 a.m., kind of finished late, and then if you're still laughing at 3 a.m., clearly it's a good thing going.
Yeah.
And the last question I have, obviously went into the future, 103-year-old Cole. Now let's go back to 16, 18-year-old Cole, about to maybe go to the Laurentian. What's one piece of advice, if you could travel back and chat with him, that you'd like to share that you've now learned, or even, let's say, someone listening that you think, hey, this is something you should know?
I think don't set yourself, or don't set your goals short of where you want to get to. I mean, just kind of shoot for the moon and where you want to go, give it a solid effort. And, you're going to be 22 or so when you get out of school. And if it doesn't work out, you're going to know in the next couple of years, and you can, okay, where do you go from here? But I think anything's possible. I mean, I think back to, again, early in my career, and the conversation started off a little awkward, but it was a gentleman that used to work for Sportsnet, and he said to me, Cole, there's a lot of useless people that end up in sports, unfortunately, because they get there as sports fans and they don't have the work ethic or the drive or the know-how to do well in their careers. But he said, you're not one of those. And I still remember that, because I didn't know where he was going with it at first, but definitely I appreciate the end. So I think that's what I would leave anybody with. Just, dream big and work hard, and there's a good chance you're going to get there.
Yeah, no, that's phenomenal. Kind of a nice compliment at the same time, but you had to maybe make sure it wasn't about you. So that's good stuff. Exactly. That's excellent. That's how I kind of like to end the podcast, because I find it puts a nice, let's say, little bow on the whole route. So I think it's been phenomenal. Unless there's anything else you'd like to share, just want to thank you for coming on and sharing your story.
Yeah, no, that's great, Chris. Thanks very much for the time. Appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, that's it for episode 125 of The Route. Stay tuned for next week's episode, and see you all next week.